So I would like to hand over to our speaker today, who is Peter Cooper, who will be talking to us all about rewilding. So over to you, Pete.
Hi, thank you very much. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today. And yeah, it's really nice to be talking again and hopefully meeting people in person again soon. So we'll just crack on to the talk. So I'll just see if Zoom plays ball when it comes to sharing screen. Hold on, just need to double check something in there. Right, okay, that's good. Okay, that should be on the share screen. So there we go, excellent. So yeah, thanks very much for having me. So good to see the turnout today, and in a way, not that surprised. It is a topic which has been gaining increasing traction really in the last few years, in a way that I personally don't think that any other subject within the UK nature wildlife scene really has in this time. There's a lot we still need to learn about it, a lot we still don't know, a lot needs more practice. But equally, there's so much more opportunity that can be had with this as we look to restore a natural world, which is frankly not just depleted, it is just going down the drain completely. So hopefully by this talk, you'll have a better idea of some of the things involved.
Peter, I think your screen is black at the moment.
Is it?
Yeah, we've not got a share screen currently, Pete, so maybe just try sharing again.
Okay, it says I'm screen sharing.
Yeah, we can see your screen, so if you just escape your PowerPoint for a second.
Okay, yeah.
And see if we'll try it again. So try viewing your PowerPoint again.
Yeah.
You can see that, that's perfect.
Okay.
There you go.
Slideshow, play from start. How's that?
It's still black again. Okay, that's not great. Didn't do that in the test run 5 minutes ago.
Did not know. Tell you what, I can close PowerPoint and reopen it. The old off and on again. I'll stop the share.
We're getting the question of, do you have two screens? Because it might be causing an issue.
2 screens. As far as I can tell, no. It's all on one laptop.
That's all right. We'll try again. Sorry, everyone, for this brief hiccup. As we always know, technology is not the most trustworthy. So there we go. We can see that.
Fantastic.
Perfect.
Excellent.
Back to you, Pete.
Right. So yeah, well, there you go. There's the summary. A nice picture of a bison going out into the woods. And then in terms of myself, quick background. Well, BSc in zoology and MSc in biodiversity conservation from the University of Exeter, but at the Penryn campus, not in Exeter. I actually went to uni with Beck, and as you will both know, trying to explain to family members that you go to Exeter uni but not in Exeter was always quite complicated. But whilst that helped give me a good sort of grounding in the scientific method of the natural world, I think really with this, the most important thing has been as a lifelong wildlife obsessive. As a naturalist, pretty much from day dot. I didn't speak till I was about 3. First word was trees, then it was bracken and gorse, and I refused to call my family by their human names. I in fact referred to my parents and my 4 brothers and their associated friends and whatnot by animal identities instead. So I was always a bit of a nature nut, and that followed through into the fact I spent most of my time out in the woods behind the house. The zoo was my second home, so it's always been something I've wanted to go into. A lot of that built into sort of volunteering experience, both during and slightly before uni, mainly working with captive wildlife, because I knew that I wanted to work with native species, primarily to go into the captive breeding to reintroduce side of things. One of my role models, as it'll be for many in this field, it was Gerald Durrell, who really did bring out this idea that we can do good in terms of restoring species if we are dedicated enough and if you put the time into it. So that was a very inspiring story to me. And then when I sort of met Derek Gow doing this kind of stuff down in Devon, I thought it was exactly what I'm getting involved with. So I started volunteering there while I was at uni. I then basically pestered him after to see if there's any work going, and then started a part-time contract in 2018, and I've been full-time since this April, working 3 days either from home or out in the field somewhere, and then 2 days down on site, mainly doing guiding with some of our new ecotourism ventures. The Derek Gow Consultancy itself is about 15 years old, so it's currently a limited company, but Derek's quite keen to sort of transfer it in, at least part of it anyway, into a charity going forward. And our speciality really is on native species, native mammals in particular. I say on a working Devon farm. Derek did farm some sheep and beef cattle, but they are pretty much all gone now. There will be some beef cattle staying on for next year. They'll be part of a sort of regenerative farming, wilder farming kind of setup. But on the whole, you know, all the lambing, all that kind of thing is gone. Derek mainly did it because, you know, he likes farming. His uncle was from a farming background and he did a lot of the agricultural shows as a kid. But when it came down to it, the effort to produce livestock had nothing in economic return and only left devastation in the landscape in the way he saw it. So really the speciality now is focusing on the conservation side of things. The water vole stuff is where most of our income comes from, not just in the conservation breeding of the species for release projects, but also because this is a protected species. Therefore, developers, if they are working on a site which has water voles or may have water voles, they're legally obliged to ensure that they can thrive, or if they can't thrive, they're relocated elsewhere. So we will go and do the specialist work in survey and relocation and mitigation for water voles on these sites. We also provide management expertise for beavers and import, and also as a halfway station between beavers moving around the country. And we're increasing our captive breeding programs too. So we are just starting to breed white storks and hopefully good numbers for the future. We are just starting to breed wildcats and hope to take part and work there. And that's something that I've been working on quite a bit behind the scenes. And some of you heard a bit more about in this talk, which I work quite in depth with, are glowworms and harvest mice as well, which we're looking to increase. In terms of other income sources, we also have a wildlife photography and film centre. So we have sets, for example, that the production companies or the BBC will use to film wood mice using a sort of piece of woodland or dormice scurrying around a tree, that kind of thing. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, we do have a new venture called Rewilding Coombeshead, where we have a large chunk of the farm, about half of the farm, that has now had all the fences gone down. We've got free roaming buffalo and boar and Exmoor ponies and beavers in the area, changing the habitat, hopefully to create some very interesting things over time. And people can come and see that by staying over in Shepherd's Huts and camping as well. We've only been doing that this year, and already it's turned over far more of a profit than farming ever did. So it's a bit of an interesting case study. But in terms of rewilding, so I talked a bit about reintroductions and then briefly mentioned rewilding at the end there. And you'll notice this talk is called Rewilding and Reintroductions. They are different things, they do interlink, and we will be using that as a sort of frame of reference for this talk going on. But I thought it's good to try and get the two things set out beforehand. So what is rewilding is a topic which comes up very, very often in these debates. Not many people are really sure of what it means or what it can do or what it does. And as is often the case in humanity, if we are unsure of something, if we are unfamiliar with a meaning, then that can generate an unknown, and that unknown can generate fear. So it's very important we do at least have some grasp of what the concept is. There is a scientific definition for it, which is the one that was devised by Michael Soule and Reed Noss in the 1990s. And that was this 3 Cs of the cores, the corridors, and the carnivores. So these were American scientists, and they were looking at this within a frame of reference to the American wilderness movement. And this was only the idea that you had these big core areas, places like Yellowstone, for example, which are connected by corridors through the landscape, which move through shared land use. So whereas the cores are in areas with minimal or no human intervention, the corridors are moving through areas of human intervention. So there are associated mitigation and land sharing techniques that allow that to take place. And on top of that, you have your carnivores. So you have your top predators, which are regulating the behavior of the herbivores. And in doing so, that increases the frequency at which vegetation, insect life, bird life, etc. can grow. But from that initial definition, looking at the American wilderness movement, the word rewilding has come to mean so many things, so many different people. I think it's been misused in many cases, personally. But equally, it has shown that if you just apply it to that wilderness movement in the US, then it also may restrict its usage elsewhere, where sometimes the state of land use, be it ecological or socio-political, means things like that won't be feasible in the near or at least far future. So there are some rough definitions that have come about. And just an example, there was one study a few years ago which tried to basically categorize different forms of rewilding as best they possibly could. So they used the 3 Cs as core rewilding as the overall in the bottom. Then they came up with passive rewilding, which is rewilding which is done either accidentally, such as in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, or through land abandonment in Eastern Europe as a result of farming decreasing in economic value, so the young people move to the cities, and therefore the farmers wild themselves. There's no one to maintain the land. This passive rewilding has no sort of set outcomes. It just does as nature does, and it's basically the most hands-off version you can get. The example in the picture there is a meadow in the Somerset Levels that was purchased by a friend of mine, Alistair Cameron, who's since set up the Somerset Wildlands, a small charity, which will seek to buy small parcels of land in the Levels as they become available, just to let them be. So his meadow is surrounded by low-lying cattle pasture, which is really typical of Levels. You can just see Glastonbury Tor in the background to give you a sense of the kind of landscape it is, just bare and flat. But it is like an absolute sea of life, just by having a profusion of much longer grasses, rushes, tall herbage, bramble going out the sides, sallows growing out the bramble. This variation of nature, which simply comes from not grazing the land and not cutting it for silage. Now, if you're trying to manage that for wildflowers, you're probably not going to get any wildflowers as it is, because the tall, coarse grasses will dominate. But equally, it's important we have areas of land where nature is allowed to do its thing, because remember, nature is a mosaic. You need to give that space to do that, and that's kind of his idea. But he's doing it through this idea of passive rewilding and letting nature take its course, and let's see what happens. Then you've got trophic rewilding, and a trophic rewilding is similar to Alice's approach. It's just getting land for nature and letting nature do its thing, but you're putting in what you see as key missing processes. And in the UK, that is often herbivory. There were large herbivores in the UK, such as the wild cattle, the aurochs, the wild horse, the tarpon, and the wild boar. And these things would have modified habitat to some extent. The extent to which they modified habitat is a big debate. Now, some of the proponents of trophic rewilding basically use as their tome a book called Forest History and Natural Grazing. I forget the exact title, but it's by a chap called Frans Vera, a Dutch scientist. And he came up with this idea, or this hypothesis, that the Europe, pre-agriculture, pre-humanity ruin everything, after the Ice Age, was this almost park-like landscape. It wasn't this closed canopy of forest, as was popularly thought. And this park-like landscape was maintained by wild cattle and wild horses. And he used the fact that the pollen records show oak and hazel were very dominant in the pollen record historically as his reason to explain this, because he said these species are open grown and therefore they need open space to grow, which sounds like a lovely idea. It's quite an Arcadian sort of view when you think about it. But then when you really start to look into it, there are some problems with this theory. For one thing, I think the idea of everything being wood pasture is just as oversimplistic as saying everything was closed canopy. Oak and hazel will grow in closed canopy woodland. Difference is that hazel, oak, for example, won't grow into the sort of big girthy sizes we see in parkland, which I think is a lot of people think of when they think of oak. That needs to be open grown. But oak itself, you only have to go to an Atlantic rainforest to see that these things don't need to be necessarily grown out in the open to thrive. Pollen records show that there was still quite a lot of canopy cover. Beetle records show there was still quite a lot of canopy cover after the Ice Age. So there is some flaw in this theory, but equally what is almost certain is there would have been some open ground, because we do have lots of open adapted species that were probably in floodplains and all the rest of it. I'll have to stop myself because I could go off on a very long debate over this one particular point. But the case being, there probably would have been some modification of habitat by large herbivores. So this seeks to put in that pressure, but it can be limited by the space you're using it in, the density of herbivores you're doing it as well. I mean, we're doing it in a sense down at Coombeshead. We've got buffalo and boar in a really very small area, even compared to Neck, which is obviously the great example of this kind of idea of trophic rewilding. So we've got to be really careful of our stocking density, while also realizing it's probably not recreating exactly what it would look like, because these animals are at far fewer density than they would be naturally, and they don't have predators either. So for those who want to go to whole hog, there's Pleistocene rewilding. And this is this idea you often find about bringing back the mammoth. There's been a lot of press about this recently. But in this case, this is a theoretical image of North America using elephants and lions as proxies for extinct mammoths and extinct cave lions and saber-toothed cats. And even so far as using giraffes as proxies for extinct ground sloths. And this is people who believe the ideal baseline is the Pleistocene, so the last ice age, because effectively most of these species, these megafauna, would probably still be here today were it not for man hunting them out. So therefore, this is a baseline we should be using. As you can imagine, Pleistocene rewilding is mostly all theory at the moment rather than practice, but there is stuff akin to it on a smaller scale, which we'll explore later in the talk. So with all these definitions, you might be getting a bit of a headache, and that's exactly what conservationists, practitioners, academics, journalists, etc., have all found themselves in ever since rewilding sort of got big, if you like, in the last 10, 15 years. So as a result, the IUCN created a specialist group, and they came up with this definition that rewilding is the process of rebuilding following major human disturbance a natural ecosystem by restoring natural processes and the complete or near complete food web at all trophic levels as a self-sustaining and resilient ecosystem using biota that would have been present had a disturbance not occurred. Now, it doesn't sound like it, but that is a brief and snappy definition by IUCN standards. But if I try to explain that to my grandma, she's already been asleep. In fact, she'd probably be dead by now. The key thing is that these things are never quite complicated. We can fit on scientific definitions, and even with stuff like these, which are actually quite precise and pretty good, given what we've got, there's still a lot of wiggle room. So actually, I quite like to think about what my friend Alistair, who brought the levels in, sorry, not the whole levels, the meadows in the levels, likes to think about rewilding. And he'll say that, why is rewilding like punk? Well, at the end of the day, you can't really define punk, but you know what it is. You look at that picture and you know it's punk, even though you can't necessarily define what it is. Like, oh, you have spiky hair. Oh, lots of fashion noise have spiky hair. But punk, jazz, musical movements, to step back on the arty side, it's more about what they mean and their philosophy that sticks with people rather than a hard-cut scientific definition. And I think this is part of the difficulty we have by completely eggshelling nature and how we relate to nature, work with nature into the scientific field. Science is obviously a massive part of it, but culture is equally as important. And I think rewilding is as much a cultural view as it is a scientific definition. And in this case, it's a shared philosophy about nature and its will being the driving factor, rather than having its interference as target-led, this idea that we know best as to the direction of which way nature is going to go. And then on to reintroductions. So again, the actual definition scientifically of a reintroduction is a conservation translocation, and conservation translocations include a few things we're about to explore, where you're bringing a species back to its former range. Of course, an introduction being where you bring a species back which never lived there in the past or has no current evidence that it lived there in the past. Then you get other forms of conservation translocation, and these include reinforcement, where there may be still of some species living in an area where you want to bring animals back to. So this reinforcement is helping to up the genetic gene pool, for example, or rescue it from extinction. And that's what happened with pine martens in mid-Wales. There was some evidence there were pine martens there, but excuse me, but the evidence suggested that they weren't really in great number, so reinforcement was needed. You've got assisted colonization, where you release a species where it's not been known to be previously present to improve its conservation status. There aren't many examples of this yet. Again, it is still quite theoretical. It's mainly been with plants so far, because there's obviously a lot of risks involved with assisted colonization, because you're introducing a species where it's not been, so you've got to think very carefully. But as we go into a world that's dominated by climate change, for some species which can't escape or shift their range in response to this changing climate by flying or crawling, or they can't do it fast enough, assisted colonization to places where the climate will be changing where it is suitable is probably going to be an increasingly more relevant tool. So keep an eye on that one. And species substitution, which is very similar to the ethos of both translocation rewilding, but trophic rewilding, but particularly Pleistocene rewilding, where you release a species where it's not been known to be previously present, but something did once live there, which filled a very similar ecological role. And mainly the reason you can't bring it back is because it's completely globally extinct. And again, not many examples so far, but one that has been done is the Aldabra tortoise on Round Island, and we will come back to that later. So what are the requirements if you're going to do a reintroduction? Well, the general advice is you do best you can to the IUCN guidelines for introductions and other conservation translocations. It was the same document for quite a long time since it was first written in the 70s. And it was only rewritten in the 2013, fairly recently, to account for the vast number of new projects, but also the vast number of lessons that have been learned as a result. The downside of this is that some of the early stuff with conservation translocations, with reintroductions, meant there was a lot of failure. And a lot of the old school conservation body have kind of got it stuck into your head now that conservation, translocations, reintroductions don't work. But this is mainly as a result of this early practice, which the guidelines are brought out in response to in the 70s. Since then, things have got better, but I still think as a conservationist working within the scene, there's still a lot of work to be done in trying to win people over with reintroduction and showing that if you put the effort in, these things can be successful. But certainly, if you are to carry out a full reintroduction in the UK, it is expected that you meet the guidelines as much as you possibly can. The key steps of this is ensuring that the threats that were there that led to extinction have been removed. It's fairly obvious. That you follow a process of pre-checking it will be okay, doing it well, and then monitoring after you've done it, and then evaluating if it's been successful. Because of course we need to at least know that the knowledge that we've gained shows that it can work and others can do it and replicate it. You have sufficient knowledge of the species biology and ecology. That your founder stock is of good quality. There's enough numbers of it, and importantly, it's not going to harm where it's come from. That you should adhere to welfare and disease requirements. Obviously, crucially important, especially species such as amphibians, which have been really badly hit by diseases such as chytrid. It should work within the range of country's infrastructure and have required support of local authority and communities, and actually be compliant with that country's legislation. So to explore some of these examples, I'm just going to go through some of the stuff that I myself have been involved with the Derek Gall Consultancy. And one of those has been reintroduction of harvest mice. Now, as you can see from these pictures, you would have to be a really, really soulless person not to be won over by a harvest mouse. I have seen the hearts of men that seem to have been forged in the heart of a volcano and steel mill and burly like that, absolutely shattering to pieces when they've seen a harvest mouse. Everyone loves them. They are Britain's smallest rodent and our only mammal with a prehensile tail. So that's a nice sort of factoid. Whereas squirrels and dormice are arboreal, live in trees, they can't rip their tail like the harvest mouse can. So it really is a species which is superbly adapted for living in the reeds, long grasses, really coarse grasses above the ground. So much so that during the summer when it's breeding, it can pretty much stay above ground for the entirety of its life. You can feed above ground, it can nest above ground. And the nesting is really important. It needs these very thick grasses to provide the space it can build its nest, which is attached to a living plant. It needs to be really thick so it can reach the stems to pull it together. So remember that, it needs coarse, thick grasses. But as a result of this need for coarse, thick grasses for nesting, it does mean it's more vulnerable to the intensification of the countryside, which is a common point you'll see for much of the stories you'll see around British wildlife and its decline. The grasses this thing needs are often seen as very weedy, obtrusive, what would be called unimproved, so they're often mown at the first sight. One of the key differences, I think, between Europe and UK is that whereas in Europe you see very tidy and clean streets, but the edges of the countryside are left to be really messy and wild, the streets in the UK are really untidy and messy, and the bits of the countryside, the edge bits that should be untidy and wild, are over manicured and overcut and trimmed. And that basically hasn't worked in the harvest mouse's favour to the point it's now near threatened in the UK. So when we're talking about the suitable habitat, I've been approached by some people who want to release harvest mice, and they'll show me their meadow because they think, oh, it's a meadow animal, surely it would do great in our meadows. And you'll look at something like that. This isn't a picture someone sent me, by the way, just to ensure that no one's being sort of uncovered here. This is just a typical Google picture of what would be a nice wildflower meadow to many. But that for a harvest mouse is really not ideal. It's great for wildflowers and it's great for some butterflies, but the harvest mouse really needs that thick, coarse grass that looks untidy and unkept. So this is one of the things you've got to bear in mind, that, you know, one bee's paradise of meadow is absolutely does no favors to a harvest mouse, which needs that thick cover. And then, of course, we've got the factor of cutting as well. In the UK, when it comes to the conservation management of grasslands, we still tend to do it by the traditional way meadows were managed before the Second World War. And the way that was done was that you would go and you'd cut your meadow around early July time, because that's when the fodder, the grass you cut, was the best quality to feed the livestock over the winter. The trouble with this is, by cutting at this time, there are many species, be they plants, insects, small mammals, which lose out. It's great for some wildflower species. And for that reason, many conservation organizations will manage meadows in this way for these wildflowers, cutting at this sort of time of the year, But for these few species that benefit, there are many more that will lose their seed sources, many insects that will be killed while they're still in the egg stage or still in the larval stage, many small animals that will still be breeding. And this is a photo from a nature reserve. All the meadows have been cut, not just this one, completely cut all the way around. On the basis of this, we've always done it this way. This is how we traditionally manage meadows. Yeah, if you look at butterfly conservation, plant life, you'll see their advice says either don't cut until September if you really can, or if you have to cut at this time, do it in rotation. Do it so you've got a third of the meadow for these few flowers that do well with this kind of cutting, but you still have maybe 2/3 which allow the other species to thrive. So you've got that mix. This is still a mindset we've got to work our way out of, and it's not one that harvest mice do well with. So when it comes to what they need, as I something described here, have this wide availability of dense continuous tufty grass. You need to have your core site. So when you look at somewhere to release, you've got to think about all the factors that might affect that going forward, not just what you're seeing at a certain time of year. So a site in a wetland might look lovely in the summer, but is it going to flood over in the wintertime? Harvest mice can go above the floodwaters in the summertime, but in the winter they're close to the ground. They're going to be a lot more vulnerable. Is a management scheme going to affect this place going forward? Is there any livestock grazing? Generally, with harvest mice, the fewer livestock, the better. Where I have found harvest mouse nests in livestock grazing systems is where things like gorse protect the nest from grazing, and you find this burst of nests. And then really important of harvest mice is connectivity to the surrounding landscape and other core areas. And if you can, release in those other cores too and create what is called a meta-population structure. Harvest mice has been found, even if you have a good population of over 1,000 animals, if that population isn't connected, then it's very vulnerable to genetic extinction. So you've got to connect these networks going forward. The connected networks themselves don't need to be this kind of rushy grass habitat. Hedgerows do absolutely fine because they move through them in the winter. It's only really in the summer they move into this kind of breeding habitat. But as long as they're connected, and ideally you have these meta populations, they should be in a good place. I mentioned cutting. So this was a trust that was managed by, estate that was managed by the National Trust, who, from my experience with them, have actually been a really, really good conservation charity for doing things well, being proactive, listening to advice, and just doing it, really. This particular meadow we were going to release, it was absolutely perfect for harvest mice. It was the optimal of the optimal, basically. But the stewardship agreements meant that they had to cut a third of it each year. But to ensure it had minimal impact on the nests, it was done as late in the year as possible. So early October, by which point most harvest mice have pretty much stopped breeding anyway. And it wasn't done in a big block. It was done in this way, which you can just about see in the right-hand photo, weaving around parts of the meadow, ensuring there were still bits that were connected to one another, but ensuring that there wasn't all cut in one swathe. And it's done by hand very slowly. So if there was anything moving, it would have a good chance to get away into the long grass in the meantime. And that's been agreed, and it means that they can still keep their stewardship agreements while also ensuring the habitat's great for harvest mice and all the other things that really are lacking mess and variability in our countryside. And then when it comes to release day, you need to figure out how exactly you're going to do your release. So our harvest mice are all captive bred at our centre. We can breed quite large numbers, less than the water voles. We can breed about 1,000 water voles a year, sometimes up to 2,000 water voles a year. Harvest mice, we're looking at closer to about sort of 700. And we use these big breeding boxes here on the right-hand side, where basically you stack it full of hay, you provide climbing materials like bramble, which they're going to encounter in the wild. They access their food above the hay, so they're feeding at height, which they would normally do. And basically have one breeding pair and all the offspring. Once the offspring reach about 4 weeks old, you take them out and then can release them. And it's really important to release young animals. Young animals are more naive. They haven't had that chance to adapt into captivity yet, and they're basically looking out to set their territories. This is one of the things I've noticed with some ecologists who think that reintroduction doesn't really work, is that they cite experience of reptile translocation, for example, moving reptiles from site to site for development purposes, and it all failing. But if you're using adult reptiles, particularly slow worms, that will often be the case because these things have already got an established territory. So when you move them somewhere else, they just can't cope. Whereas if you move young animals in big number, they are naive, they haven't found anywhere to settle yet, and they're much more likely to take this place as where they're meant to be because you're effectively fast-tracking dispersal phase for them. The other key thing is big numbers. So this will depend on the species you're working with. You will have species which are selected, which I hope I get this right, remember from my zoology course, are selected, which are animals which have short lifespans but produce big numbers of young in order to survive and make many young quickly. Harvest mice being case in point. So you release big numbers. So for this release about 200 in one go. If you're releasing species which are case selected, such as the white-tailed eagle, these are species which have fewer offspring but have longer lives and invest more in their offspring to get more out of it. So the reintroductions in the Isle of Wight right now, for example, we use only 6 eagles a year for 5 years, or 6 to 8 eagles a year. But that is enough to sort of fulfill that species need. So you also got to look at your species ecology, its life history, to work out how many you've got to release. Then you've got to think about how you're going to release it. So in the case of harvest mice, we go for a bit of a unique thing, which is what you might call a semi-soft release. And generally, you've got 2 forms of release. You've got hard release and soft release. Hard release is where you just chuck the animals out straight away. Good luck, off you go. And for a lot of species, that doesn't really work out because it's very disorientating. They don't know what they're doing. And they might go for miles and get hit by a car. They don't really settle. So for many species, such as the water voles, we will soft release. They're released into a pen first with companion animals, which are suitable for that particular species dynamic, whether it's a small group of young animals or a pair. It allows them to acclimatize the environment they're in. They will stay within that pen for a period of time, which can vary from a couple of days to a week or a couple of weeks. Then after that time period has ended, a door will be opened and they'll be allowed to leave. They've been supplied food while they're in there. They will be supplied food once the door is open. And even after they've left, food is still supplied until you're absolutely sure they're gone. Harvest mice, no one really knew. Chester Zoo did some work in the early noughties of hard release and soft release, and they found it didn't really make much difference. And this is also something that was found at the British Wildlife Centre when they were trying harvest mouse releases too. And I think that's partly because of their nature. If you've ever seen or kept harvest mice in captivity, you'll know they're very, very bold in a way that you don't really see from wild rodents that are kept captive normally. And I think that comes down to their lifestyle. This is a species that evolved in places like floodplains where there were these sort of reeds and long grasses before farms, you got to remember. And these are habitats which are not very stable. They can get flooded quickly. They're very vulnerable to sort of chance events. So you've got to be able to move very quickly to respond to these dramatic changes in the environment. And I think that's why the species, the harvest mouse, are so naturally bold, and why actually, they can be hard released just fine and do okay. But to make sure they're extra secure, we release them in the pens. So they are open for day one. So it's like a hard release, but they can go back into the pens if they want to for some food and some shelter. But as you'll see in the next video clip, they normally just head straight out with no questions asked. So this one here, straight out of the pen. You can see the tail, watch carefully. It curls around the stems as it goes.
Hey, bye. Good luck out there.
Yeah, lovely clip. And then the post-release monitoring. As I say, you've got to make sure these projects have actually worked. With harvest mice, we found the most reliable method, certainly for ensuring presence, is nest searches. And if any of you have been searching for harvest mouse presence, it's exactly the same thing. You go through the tussocks in the late autumn, in the winter time, when they've left the nests, so you're sure you're not going to be disturbing them, and you can find these old breeding nests. The reason I say it's a great way of detecting presence is because one female harvest mouse will use multiple nests a year. Often once she's had one litter of babies, she'll build a new nest because the old nest is being damaged by the babies trying to get out. So one nest does not equal one harvest mouse. But if you find a big number of them, then that's a reasonable assumption. You still got a good number there. And thankfully, I can say that at the site where we released in 2019, we were going to do another release in 2020, but COVID delayed that. So we did another top-up release this year. The 2 winters so far have seen good numbers of nests in the release area. So we're hopeful again for this autumn. We did try trapping in the first year, but harvest mice, if anyone's been to mammal trapping, you may know, are quite a difficult species to get in longworth traps, the kind of mammal traps you use. We did catch one, but when it comes to reliable indicators, it wasn't the best one to go for. So nest searching is what we've gone for the moment. Getting it right, people. So just a quick warning, if any of you are squeamish, you might want to sort of look away. Going to the other side of the conversation, completely opposite from harvest mice, you've got large carnivores. And if you think about these species which are easier to do socially, like a harvest mouse, but maybe harder to do ecologically because you've got specific needs, large carnivores are very often the reverse case. They're very often generalists. They don't necessarily need wilderness to survive. all they need is food, which is often their good supply, be it in deer or livestock. And that brings us on to why they're much, much harder socially. And, you know, at the end of the day, conservation, reintroduction, it's a human process, it's human practice. So that's borne in mind. This, for example, is seen outside the village town hall in the Pyrenees, where farmers protest the return of bears and wolves by presenting bloodied sheep at the doors. So, you know, it did not go down very well. In the UK context, you can do these things very well indeed, but you've got to put the work in, you've got to get trust. If you don't have trust, then it's not going to go anywhere. The Vincent Wallace Trust project, Reinforced Pine Martens in Wales, did a really exemplary job of winning the trust of local people. Dave Bavin, who's the guy on the ground down there, when they were first proposing this project to them in the village hall, one of the farmers stood up and said, if any of these pine martens come near my land, I'm going to shoot them. And he stormed out the building. Cut to a couple of years later, after they've released the martens, and the same farmer is now phoning Dave up to say, I've just seen quad bikers on my land. Shall I go to tell away because I'm worried they're going to scare the martens? That's the kind of community buy-in they had as a way of carefully approaching this project, asking people what their views were, you know, how they could get involved, but importantly, being people that they could have a chat in the street with, have a drink in the pub with. This is really key. And now the community are very proud of these pine martens. On the other side of the coin, you've got the proposal by a trust, which was literally just two people who tried to apply for a license to introduce lynx in Kilda. It was very swiftly rejected by Michael Gove, who was Environment Sec at the time, mainly because, you know, well, there's lots of ecological data lacking. One of the questions was, what are the license holders' experience of lynx? And the prospective license holder put a photo of him with a tame lynx on a lead, but mainly because of the social attitude. You know, farmers going absolute chaos at local meetings. This was something that my boss Derek saw in one of the local pubs. The Lynx Trust had handed out these cardboard cutouts of lynx to the pubs. The locals has taken it, drew some glasses, some human appendages on it, some, you know, interesting quotes on the side, and was basically saying all locals in the pub were just sort of joking about who would kill the first lynx if they were released. It was not a project that was taken seriously by the locals at all. But this team also lost the trust generally from everyone. You won't find a single conservationist who, you know, sees them as competent by the fact they would lie. It seems to be the only reason they would stay around is they knew people in the press who didn't know any better and would just go to them with a press release without any backing to really support what they were saying. Such as here, where they claimed that all the landowners in the area were supportive of lynx, but in reality, all the people nearby said they'd not been consulted, you know, not said yes. It was basically all a complete shambles. But the reality is, when you look at large carnivores, if we didn't have them in this channel, they would be back here now. These photos are not from the UK, but they certainly could be. They're from Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, where wolves are now reclaiming their range. There are breeding packs there. There's social videos on what to do if you see a wolf, but it's all been done in a way that broaches coexistence with this animal as a right to be here. And it is difficult. If you're talking about, if you wanted to reintroduce wolves to the UK, you couldn't just say, oh, we'll just reintroduce them to the Scottish Highlands. They would be back in the whole of Britain because these things move very, very fast. Young wolves will disperse massive distances. There's been tagged wolves that have gone from Italy to France, Italy to Spain. So it'd be in Cornwall within a couple of months. You would need to reshift the entire farming paradigm. You need to bring stock in at night, re-employ shepherds. You know, it would be a big, big thing, and it wouldn't be easy. And while I'd love to see it happen in my lifetime, I'm very sad to say I'd almost be surprised. But at the same time, how do we expect developing countries to live alongside the elephants and tigers we love so much? Things that can destroy their sugarcane in the night and eat their grandma, if we can't accept an animal that's not really caused any human fatalities in the last 20 years in Europe. There are interesting, complex questions here, but it is not ecological, it's social. When it comes to reintroducing things like wolves, it's about maybe 5 or 10% biology, 90% politics, sociology. So when we talk about reintroductions with rewilding, they're not necessarily the same thing. These are all examples of projects which have been done in the UK for quite a few years now, before rewilding was even a thing, but they often tie quite neatly into conservation projects. Sand lizards, for example, have a sandy heaths that needs managed and grazed for them or burnt for them. the large blue butterfly, especially, it needs an ant species to, process this larval stage, which needs really, really short grass. So you've got to have very extensive sheep grazing, which rules out most other species, but doesn't rule out the ant and the butterfly that it needs to live with. And even if you look at projects which do kind of fit into this rewilding paradigm of restoring key species and processes back, the people doing them, such as the Forestry Commission, Roy Dennis and the Isle of Wight with white-tailed eagles, or the Vincent Wildlife Trust, the Pie Martins in Wales, won't call them rewilding, because rewilding has a real bitter pill amongst rural communities, and you're going to lose trust if you call it rewilding from the outset. But the key thing of reintroductions in rewilding projects is to be part of the toolkit. They'll be part of the process you do, especially if that goes towards restoring key natural processes, such as by providing keystone species, which is a carnivore, which has a disproportionate effect through trophic cascades. We talk a lot about wolves and the deer at Yellowstone, but the sea otter is a good example. When sea otters are wiped out, there's nothing to eat the urchins eat all the kelp forest goes. But you bring them back, then the kelp forest is restored. Ecosystem engineers, humans are technically the biggest engineer, but elephants are by far one of the most important ones after us. They have this really disproportionate effect through their foraging activity on their wider environment. And then after the elephant, you've got this guy, the beaver. We couldn't go about this talk without mentioning beavers, of course. These are the kind of landscapes you can see them restored. This used to be a little stream in Bavaria. It's now, after 15 years of beaver damming, a complex wetland of pools, of rushes, of a complex wetland environment. It's not really been seen since the Mesolithic. But a key thing about this picture, what I really love, is how you've got a complex wetland in the middle, agriculture at the bottom, agriculture in the middle, and then woodland. And you can't see it because the photo is too blurry, but there is a hunting post out there at the top. Obviously, hunting is quite a big thing in Germany. So it shows you can still have these multiple land uses alongside wild restored nature. There's been lots of fence projects around the country. So many now, over 20 of them, I think, by now, which provide useful data on the ecology of what beavers do, holding back water, for example, slowing the flow, in restoring space for all these species that couldn't be there otherwise. But in terms of meaningful re-establishment, there's not been much going on. However, there is since been this consultation for free release of beavers in the UK, in England rather, which I suggest you all go and contribute to before the closing date in November, because the response of that is likely to take the release of more wild beavers in the UK from next year. This consultation is mainly derived from the population of river otter, which actually stemmed as a covert release population, released by people who were bored that beavers weren't here already or escaped. And there've been more since. So near to me in Bristol, for example, River Avon has a population of beavers, again, stemming from escapes or illegal releases. But how people are willing to accept beavers, if we're going back to the social side of things, can often depend on the geography. So whereas in River Otter, where beavers appeared almost overnight in some people's view, but they had been there for quite a few years, because the beavers weren't building dams, because they're living in a big, deep river where they don't need to build dams, beavers only build dams to feel safe from predators, where the water's too shallow. So they tend to do it in the sort of small headland streams. But if they're just living in a river and they're not causing any damage, and it turns out there's beavers there, people are like, great, fantastic, woohoo. Whereas in Tayside, they went straight into a catchment with small ditches, so they dammed them very quickly. They flooded farmers' fields, caused lots of local damage, and it led to lots of persecution from farmers. So therefore, it's a very different reception to beavers compared to, say, the River Otter. So as I mentioned earlier, despite progress in the Scottish situation, which is one where translocations aren't actually allowed within the country, almost as a way to alleviate the concerns of the farming bodies, although this may well change, so keep an eye on it. There is consultation for free release this summer, so hopefully we'll see free releases by next year. But we've got to make sure that it is a program that allows for more beavers rather than restricting it. So when it comes to reintroductions, do we need to be more flexible in how we think about this sort of process, this policy? Coming back to assisted colonization, should we look at artificial range expansion? Should we look at more proxy releases? You may have heard about the bison in Kent. This won't be a reintroduction because they won't technically be wild animals. They'll still be enclosed within about 500 hectares of woodland, but functionally they will be like wild animals. Their activities of browsing, of wallow making in the space they're in will be exactly the same as a wild bison. But bison aren't actually native to the UK, or at least as far as we can tell, aren't native to the UK. We found no bones of bison in Britain since the last ice age. But we have in the North Sea, which was connected to Britain. So it does seem a bit odd that they just stopped at the Straits of Dover. But equally, we found lots of bones of bears of wild cattle, so we'd expect to see more bison. There is some evidence to suggest the aurochs was actually a hybrid of the extinct steppe bison. The bison was a hybrid of steppe bison and the aurochs, extinct wild cattle. So maybe the bison is the next best thing. And also, it's not wild in the first place; it's semi-wild. So does it really matter? These are debates to be had. Surrogate species, over on Round Island, again, way beyond the UK, this island, which itself is an offshoot of the island where the dodo used to live, was completely ravaged by feral goats and completely wiped out what little endemic wildlife there was, apart from a few seabirds and a few lizards and snakes. But what it used to have were giant tortoises. These were all eaten by pirates in distant past, but by losing the native giant tortoises, certain plants which relied on the seed dispersal activity of these animals could not then flourish. So they brought in a non-native species from other islands to fill that niche. So this is almost Pleistocene rewilding in action. You're storing a technically non-native species, but it's a function that is important, and it's really done that function well. And then when you talk about rewilding, yes, we've got all these big areas we're looking to rewild. The picture at the top there is a Lowther estate in Cumbria, where the landowners are looking to rewild about 5,000 acres for wildlife. But our landscape has been so tarnished that in many cases the nearby wildlife just isn't there for a lot of these big rewilding schemes. So we maybe do have to be a bit more bold thinking about reintroductions, bearing in mind the fact that many people in the UK are, in the conservation scene at least, are still quite on the fence or skeptical of reintroductions and how well they work. In many cases, it's the only thing that is going to do so. These species may be too far away, the possible source populations just too far for them to get there, particularly if they can't fly or swim, or maybe too weak to recolonize. There's this thing called critical mass. If this population is below a critical mass threshold, it's really unlikely to recolonize or reach a suitable population level ever again unless it's supplemented. Just an example, there's a guy I know who worked for a conservation body who were consulted along with several others about contributing to a tender for crane reintroduction in Scotland. And some of the bodies were like, oh, we'd rather not have cranes in Scotland because we'd rather let them naturally recolonize. And also, we don't think they'd do well up in the uplands. To which the guy I knew in the other organization said, well, okay, well, first off, we know that cranes live in uplands quite well in Scandinavia and Finland. And secondly, based on what we know of crane recruitment rates and reproduction and all the rest of it, this is a quick back of the envelope population model for how many cranes you will have by 2040 if you rely on natural recolonization alone. And it's 2 pairs. Is that your flourishing population? We've got to think a bit more widely about it. We've got far more evidence than we used to have. And at the end of the day, we're in a state of nature where we can't afford to be too picky about what is and isn't right, because ultimately it's down to philosophy in many cases. It's this idea that we're playing God, we should just let species naturally colonize, build it and they will come, that kind of thing, which is great, and it does work in many cases, but for many other cases it doesn't. And you can state all you like your philosophy, but for some species it will only be a direct approach that we will really be able to see these things naturally colonize. So you can go with Life Finds a Way by Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, and it's a great quote and it does apply in many situations. But in terms of the jigsaw of the natural world, we have scattered the pieces right across the room, and we need to go and find them and pick them up to put them back together again. So do we need a new kind of wildlife conservationist? One that is a combination of zookeeper for the skills of captive management of species, of the management skills which then apply to the field once you're doing vet screening, once you're doing transport, of farming in terms of working the land and knowing what's what. In terms of traditional conservation as well, in monitoring and ecology, a combination of all 3, certainly when it comes to species ecology, maybe the kind of direction we need to go in. But the other key thing about reintroductions is they can spark inspiration for nature, if they're not us, the 99% of the British public who don't know that there is much British wildlife beyond a couple of pigeons and a squirrel. Some of these species may not be globally endangered, they may not necessarily have this justification or conservation status, or even as an ecological function status to reintroduce them, but they can act as bastions of hope. So if one species like the white stork, a former native, the project in NEP has been phenomenal in garnering local support for the kind of work they're doing. And one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is looking to do just that. I'm just going to briefly stop the screen share because rather than use a screen, I've actually got a practical example to show you, because I've actually got the Glowworm captive breeding project just behind me here. So these are the kind of complex facilities to breed glowworms in, but based on the expertise of a German private keeper, this is exactly what works, and it certainly worked for me. In the last year, I've managed to breed over 750 glowworm larvae, and we did our first trial release this summer. I've still got a couple of mature larvae, which will probably pupate next year. Just find one of the bigger ones. Right, there she is. All right, if you can sit my finger there. Just try and get to sit my finger. Right. Can you see her? So that is a glowworm larva. It's about the same sort of size an adult's going to get to. They don't really glow at this stage. They do sometimes give a really sort of little faint glow if they're disturbed, which basically means, you know, go away. But the full LED light, that comes from the breeding adult female, and that's to attract a male. Now, these are a species that have declined in abundance, certainly in the southeast of England. They still have quite a wide distribution. They still live in a few different types of habitat. But we now do have evidence there has been local declines. But really importantly of glowworms is that they're really bad at moving. So when we talk about species that can't access new sites, glowworms are typical of that. If the habitat connection has been lost, or if a population goes extinct and there aren't glowworms nearby, they won't come back, simple as that. And John Tyler, who's the UK glowworm expert, has been really helpful in this project. Just sit on the finger there, you can see that really nicely. He's been saying that it's only 20 years ago, there is some good interest in looking to translocate glowworms for conservation purposes to new sites. So that's exactly what we're doing, but not just for the glowworms, to engage people as well. Because what glowworms need is long grass and scrub for larvae, like this little fella or little Sheila here, which is full of snails, which they eat, and full of cover where they can overwinter. But they also need short grass and bare ground as an adult, where they can glow and be seen. So you need this messy mix where you're not over mowing and you're not over managing a site, but you still have a little bit of a light touch to ensure you still have short grass areas, maybe even for extensive grazing. And if you have the glowworm, this species that lights up in the dark, which fascinates everyone, it's fascinated civilizations since the Babylonian times, basically. And you say, right, if you want to keep your glowworms, you've got to ensure that this habitat stays in this kind of wilder fashion. And if you've got local people who don't know about the local wildlife, but hear about glowworms and acts as the gateway to wider nature, then that's a really, really good tool. So these are, things we can't necessarily ignore straight away. So I might sort of whiz through these slides, because I've kind of talked about this already. But yeah, this is some of the setup. So that last picture, you can see one glowing glowworm I had during the glowing season, and it was such a bright light, really cool. Again, it's there. That's the adult female on the left, and that's kind of glow we'll have. And I think, all this work, I always come back to this quote by Chief Crowfoot. What is life? Life is a flash of a glowworm in the night. It's this sort of beacon of hope. It can be flickering, it can be really brief for a moment, but it stays with you, because that's what life is. And even in this face of massive wildlife loss and climate breakdown, we still have these lights in the dark, the glowworms, which we're hoping will light the way to much wider restoration for more things, but also reinforcing that connection with people. And that's certainly something that we hope we can see with a great application of more rewilding and reintroductions in the future. So yeah, there is more potential coming along. The government are apparently considering reintroductions more seriously now. How do you get involved? It's still a fairly niche area. I think the skills are you tend to get through as being a species ecologist, so as waterfowls or dormice, for example, or as a zookeeper or working in wildlife rehab. These give you these hands-on skills for the reintroduction side of things. when it comes to rewilding, in many cases, like, you know, if you're lucky enough to have enough money to buy some land, then great, you know, just let it be. But you don't need to have to buy a huge amount of land to still apply that rewilding philosophy to it. And try and volunteer bodies that are actively involved in it. But, you know, just bear in mind for those who are sort of younger and trying to get some experience out there, there is a lot of competition for these posts. So just a quick slide, you know, if you want to keep in touch, you've got any further questions, you're welcome to email me. But that email can be contacted through my website. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and I've just started going on TikTok as well to try and reach a new audience, younger audience that needs to be reached with these nature messages, and that's going well so far. But yeah, thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Peter. It was incredibly interesting, and I'm sure everybody really enjoyed that as well, and a little bit show and tell as well, so a bit of everything for everyone. We're obviously at the end of the session, so if anyone does need to leave, then obviously take off. But if you would like to stay on, I'm sure, Pete, are you happy to do some questions now? So we will hold on. So if anyone does have any questions that they'd like to ask in person, you can use the reactions button, which will do the virtual hand raise. But to start with, we'll go to Olivia, who's got some questions from the chat.
Yeah, so it was very busy through the chat, and I think there was a bit of discussion about some rewilding over near the foothills of the Pyrenees, I think. So that was good to see. So question wise, just going to start with some on the glowworm larvae that you just showed us. Just had a question in when at the larval stage, can you sex the glowworms?
You can't sex them, definitely. I'm 99% the one just there was a female. You can only really do that once they reach their last larval stage, once they're big enough. So you can measure the width of what's called the protonum, which is the bit behind the head. And in females, it's nearly always more than 2 millimeters wide. Bit of nerdy stuff for you there. So you're fairly confident it's a female at that stage, but not 100%. The only guarantee is once they pupate, and then the pupa between the female and the male are really distinctive.
Fab, thanks. And then with the glowworms, it's just where are you hoping to release the glowworms for the?
So we've got a trial site in Hampshire. We did our first release this summer with 569 larvae, and we'll be doing another one there next year because glowworms they generally have a 2-year life cycle in the wild, so you've got to ensure you're doing at least 2 in a row. Otherwise, you'll have 1 year about glowworms each other year rather. But there's another couple of trial sites potentially up in the north we're looking at. And, you know, we are sort of interested to hear if there's more about. We are hoping the project will grow. The thing is, we won't know if it's being truly successful in terms of establishing the wild until summer 2023 in the release site. That's when the first adults will start to appear if they do. So there's still a lot of unknowns, but the more trial sites, the better, I think, to get a good idea of it. Because once you know it does work, you know, I would like to roll it out so that we have multiple breeders across the country, you know, working with their local communities to restore glowworms.
Oh, fab, thank you. So there's quite a mix here, but we'll start with this one from Sarah. What do you think is a better term to use than rewilding?
I tend to use wilding more often. I just take the re out quite a bit because the re obviously implies that you're going back in the past, whereas if rewilding or wilding, you're taking lessons from the past but applying them to a sort of different future. You can use ecological restoration or restoration, but it doesn't exactly sell if you're trying to sort of bring sort of funders or the public on board with you. So wilding seems to be a more safe option. I mean, that's certainly obviously it's what Izzy Trees used for the title of her book, and that is something that has basically won over even some of the more skeptical sort of landowners and farmers in the country. So I tend to go with wilding when I can.
Fab, thank you. I'm just going to check with Beck. Have we got anybody that wants to ask verbal questions, or are we just?
It doesn't look like it currently. We obviously will prioritise verbal questions. We're still getting some questions through in the chat, so if you would like to just come ask it might be quicker because we'll probably only do a few more of the questions from the chat because there were so many. So if you are super keen, oh, I think I've got a wave over there, right, so we'll unmute you, Katrina, and if you'd like to come and ask a question to Peter, then you can. So if you'd like to just unmute yourself. There we go. Yeah,
Hello?
would you like to ask your question? Yeah,
Oh.
perfect. Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, Pete. I've got a question about, you're talking about translocating slow worms. I mean, typical sort of situation, new school going to be built on a site which has got slow worms on it. The council's now backed down on translocating the slow worms to what I think is an ideal site of this cemetery. So if they did that with young, because there's, you know, different generations of slow worms were there on site. If we just started to translocate the younger ones to this cemetery, which isn't far away from it, would that be sort of more acceptable? I mean, have you got any more information on, you know, or sources of information for?
Yeah. Well, it's it's a woman called Anne Riddell who did one of the studies which looked at that. But working around, you know, how these sort of things work with conservation biology and life history of reptiles and the other species, then if you translocate the young slow worms, you can find them, then you'll have more of a chance of them establishing a new site. They're still that bit more naive. I mean, in slow worms, as you may well know, very, very long lived. So if you're, you know, moving a slow worm that's 15 years old to a new site, then it's going to be unlikely to really sort of settle. But certainly the young slow worms are more likely to.
Tiny ones and juveniles and Okay. So Anne Riddell is the person to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Is that RIDDELL? Or shall I just email you?
Yeah, I'll have to look it up. I think it's give me an email if you like, and I can put you in touch with
Okay. Cheers. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll head back to Olivia. I think we're just going to do two more, so she's going to pick out two for us, and then anyone else who has any questions, obviously Pete has given you his email. I did put it in the chat as well, but I will include it in the follow-up email that will be sent with the YouTube recording, so lots of chances to ask your questions if it hasn't come up. But Olivia, over to you.
Okay, so I've got a question here from Stephen when we were talking about the harvest mice. Just saying, if they evolved on floodplains, isn't it hard to find suitable habitat for the harvest mice that isn't vulnerable to flooding?
When it comes to evolving on floodplains, there's still a bit of conjecture, but that's mainly based on the fact that this is an animal that lives within long grass, tall, dense vegetation, which in a pre-farming landscape would have been quite hard to find in many places, apart from floodplains, maybe some areas of sort of disturbed ground in the uplands and places like that. But from today, like, you will find harvest mice in quite big numbers in reed beds and river valleys and all the rest of it. So as long as the habitat has those dense, thick, coarse grasses or reeds, harvest mice will thrive, whether it's dry or wet. You know, the wetness doesn't necessarily matter as such. In most cases, if there's a flood event, they'll have someone nearby to move on to. That could be a potential limiting factor. But certainly in the summer months when they're living up in nests, then they're not really that vulnerable.
Thank you. And I've got one here from Holly. So do you believe that the reintroduction of boar and lynx would be successful in the long run?
I think we'll have more luck, to be honest, with lynx in the future. I would be surprised if we don't have a well-considered application for lynx in the next 20 years. The storm of rubbish that went down in Kielder has sort of put a lot of people off, I think, and in that area particularly, I don't think you're going to see much going on, because that's still going to leave quite a bitter taste in the mouth. But in terms of where we're going with reintroductions and our understanding of it, I think we're in a much better place for lynx. So the key thing of lynx is, whereas unlike wolves, which would be able to live here tomorrow if you looked at the environment, but won't be here for a very long time if you look at the social side of things, with lynx, they do need a bit more woodland habitat. But there has been studies that have shown that you could support 450 lynx in the Scottish Highlands today as it stands. But socially, yes, there's a lot of work to do, but it's not quite as dramatic as wolves. I mean, lynx will never kill a person, for example. The sheep they will take is relatively limited compared to the number of wolves, because they don't hunt animals that aren't in small groups out. They won't hunt animals that are big flocks out in the fields like sheep are generally. The biggest impact of sheep on lynx from lynx is in Norway, where they graze small flocks in the woodland. There is currently a social study going on in the Cairngorms, Trees for Life, Scotland Big Picture, and Vincent Wildlife Trust, and that's a year-long thing asking just the people locally what they would think about lynx, and if there's a complete uproar against them, they will say, yeah, don't worry, won't bother with it. But if there's people who say, okay, we're interested, then they'll take it further. So I'll be surprised if we don't get any other links. Boar are interesting. Wild boar have established themselves in a similar way to many of the beavers in the UK, i.e. from escapes and illegal releases. But they're a much more difficult species to live alongside. I mean, the Forest of Dean, people are initially very happy to have them back when they're at low number. Then they reached about 1,500, 1,200 population, digging up cemeteries, scaring horses, attacking dogs. And then people are like, actually, we don't like these animals at all. So you've got a bit more of a difficult case with boar. So they'll be here, but how willingly we'll allow them to spread, I don't know. That's the trickier question. But I think that ironically be more accepting of lynx going forward than boar.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, really interesting. I've heard, yeah, lots about boar and lynx, and it's interesting that the boar have been there and then changed people's perception. So yeah, fab, thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. So like I said, in the follow-up email that will be sent to you probably by the end of the week, we'll have the YouTube recording, and also we'll include Pete's email in case there was a question that we didn't unfortunately get to that you would like to ask. So still lots of opportunities for that.